Hi everyone, and welcome to this Socialist Alternative rally. My name is Yara, and I'll be hosting this rally tonight. We're very excited to talk about such an important subject today, and we are joined with some fantastic speakers, so I'm really looking forward to get to know more about the campaigns that they're involved in and learn more about this. So before we start, I want to remind everyone who's watching to share this with your friends, start a watch party, send the link to everyone you know, especially if they're school students or university students, and of course, like and comment. We really want to hear about your experiences too. So were you involved in any education campaigns, even if it was 10 years ago? Tell us about it. How was it like? What did you learn from it? How were the A-levels protests in your region? Did you go to any? And what do you think the movement should focus on? We want to hear everything you have to say, so please put it in the comments. Now, we all remember how just a month ago the Tories came up with this algorithm to calculate A-levels in the A-levels results in the pandemic situation. But the algorithms were exactly what you'd think that the Tories would come up with. They were terrible. Instead of calculating results based on predicted grades that were given by teachers that had the expertise and had the experience, the algorithm only took the predicted grades into account, but it also took into account the school that you go to. So in other words, basically how rich your family is. It showed plainly what we've all known for years, that unlike what the ruling class has been trying to sell us for so long, exams aren't this meritocratic tool to judge who's good enough to go to uni and who isn't. It's just a way to keep working-class people away from higher education, away from better jobs, away from social mobility. Now, the Tories quickly did a U-turn on the results when students around the country took to the streets and fought tooth and nail for their future. But this victory is an important one. We shouldn't take it lightly at all. It really proves that when we fight, we can win. And also it proves that we should be fighting. And that's why it's so crucial that this fight continues now against a broader issue of A-levels as a whole, particularly in this pandemic conditions. Exams have acted as gatekeepers for working class people from reaching higher education, but they've also had a significant impact on mental health of students and many other issues. So students have unfinished business with the government and the education system, and they're fighting back against it. It's really, truly inspiring. So we're going to be discussing this and more today. First, I want to introduce our panel for this evening. So we've got Aisha, who is a college student and an A-level strike 2021 organizer, who's here to speak a little bit about the campaign and why it's so important to keep the fight going. Then we have Aretha, who is a member of Socialist Alternative's sister party in Ireland, the Socialist Party. Now, Socialist Alternative is a member of an International Socialist Alternative, which is a socialist organization with activists all over the world in more than 30 countries, and Haritha is in our Irish section. Now, Haritha is also a college student who was involved in the Leaving Cert campaign in Ireland, which bears a lot of resemblance to the A-levels campaign here. So I think it would be great to learn from the successes of that campaign and learn from someone who's done something similar to that already. And finally, don't think that we've forgotten the people on the other end of the classroom. We've got James, who's a school teacher and Lewisham NEU branch president, who's here in a personal capacity. And he'll be able to share some of his experience being involved with similar campaigns historically, and also talk about why teachers should support the strikes now. So to start us off, I want to hear from Aisha. Can you tell us a little bit about this campaign and what started it?
Okay, so Ofcom released a consultation report that basically said next year's A-levels are a fair playing field and made basically no changes to the exams next year. So there was obviously a lot of frustration surrounding it. So for me and a few of my friends, we got together and we started this campaign. We created an Instagram account, and then within like 3 days, we were trending second on Twitter. So we were like, this could actually work. So we organized our first protest and we organized our first strike this week. We're hoping to do more, but we're hoping to branch out a bit more and then do more strikes, hopefully, to campaign for changes to the exam next year's.
That's brilliant. I think it's really interesting and really important that we all kind of join this campaign. And I think we can all agree that the education system generally needs to be changed radically, but also specifically now in these conditions. Now, Haritha, the situation with the Leaving Cert in Ireland was very similar, and I know you were very active in the struggle. So can you tell us a little bit about this, give us some background around it, what's happened there?
Course. And firstly, I'd like to say that there's like a very similar situation for sixth years at the moment. So those are students, in their final year of secondary education in Ireland who are about to sit there, or at least expecting to sit there, the terminal examination, the Leaving Cert, in 2021. A lot of anxiety on lost class time, of a potential second wave, that could result in the closure of schools again, which could result in online classes being rolled out again, which from previous experience was not only frustrating for students and teachers, but also very discriminatory towards students in rural areas that don't have as strong of a broadband connection, working class and poor families who are less likely to have the devices necessary to fully participate in online education, and of course students with mental health issues and disabilities, or who live in abusive families who are cannot access the support that they need when in school. And there have been a couple of concessions, however, made to the class of 2021. For example, more choice in the Leaving Cert papers, but it's unclear whether this is significant enough, especially on the huge pressure on working class schools, especially to catch up with such a large amount of content, amount of content. However, many students have come together a significant layer of students have come together to demand an option of predicted grading for this year's students as well. And the confidence to make this demand came from the victory of the class of 2020 in actually pressuring the government to cancel the Leaving Cert earlier this year. Because unlike in the UK or in the US or in France, most other countries, the government did not cancel the Leaving Cert in the first month of lockdown, which just caused a huge amount of pressure and stress to build up among students and teachers who were struggling to get to grips with online learning. And so students were really disgusted when the government actually decided that they would only be postponing the exams to later on in August, to July, August time, in which they announced in April. And already you can see the major difference in private schools versus working class schools in online education. I know one of my friends who attends a very elite private school had online classes full time, while I could count the number of online classes I had for those 2 months on one hand. And of course, many working class students were much more worried about the content that they were missing out on. And of course, at the time, huge uncertainty around what COVID-19 would look like in July. Would we be sitting in exam halls in PPE? Who would supply that PPE? What about students that were grieving the loss of friends and family as a result of COVID-19? And what about students that tested positive during the exams? Just like huge amount of questions plaguing young people. And of course, just the huge impact that studying for such a terminal memorization and regurgitation based exam was having on young people, especially in the middle of a global pandemic. And of course, young members of the Socialist Party, especially, which is the sister party of Socialist Alternative in Ireland, were equally disgusted by this. And through discussions that we had with young people, we were able to organise around key socialist demands, which we put forward, especially in a very successful live stream we had with one of our TDs, so the equivalent of an MP, Mick Barry, on May 6th. And here the willingness of young people to get organised for the cancellation of the Leaving Cert was very clear. We had over 1,500 students signing up to join our campaign in a Facebook group, and a Twitter storm the next day directed towards the TDs who would be entering into coalition saw the Leaving Cert cancelled the next day, which is incredibly significant and just shows the huge amount of power that we have as young people to force our government to stop such a repressive system.
Brilliant. This is I think such an amazing victory, like you said, and I think it just really shows the power that we also have here in the UK. So I was wondering, because of the similarity between those campaigns, I was wondering what were the demands that you had during the campaign, and like how do you think they relate to the demands that we might have here?
I think the demands are very similar across the board. In a survey done by one of the students' unions in April, it showed that 76% of Leaving Cert students, so this is 2020 Leaving Cert students, favoured a predicted grading model over sitting exams. But as socialists, we actually identified a need to go further upon that. We really saw flaws in the predicted grading model, because in Ireland, predicted grading has never been used before, unlike in the UK. And we could really see inaccuracy of predicted grading, and especially how it's especially discriminatory towards working class students and students from marginalized communities, students of color, etc. And this is obviously made crystal clear through the abysmal standardization of the A-level results, which would have been seen here if not for the huge movement of A-level students demanding a U-turn. So we also, of course, identified the huge pressure that a predicted grading model that had never been used before in the history of the country would put on teachers who would be receiving no extra pay. And fundamentally, we had an understanding that COVID-19 actually wasn't causing this crisis in education. Maybe it was really just exposing the nature of the capital. Cert has always been an exam that has favoured middle-class students that could access grind, private education, who had access to a quiet study space and did not have a mental health issue or a disability, etc. So we actually demanded the mass funding of higher education institutions and into apprenticeships as well, to ensure that everyone would get their first, second, or third CAO choice. So their first, second, or third, maybe third, uni choice. And issuing a certificate to every student so that they could progress into work if they so wished. And this really allowed us to expose the system based on supply and demand for uni entry that forces students to just compete against one another due to a lack of funding into higher education. And Ireland has had the second lowest rate of education spending in the per GDP in the EU. So it would definitely have been possible for the government to prioritize, opening up crucial college places over just mollycoddling huge corporations like Apple with 14 billion euro tax breaks. So yes, this allowed us to really expose the extremely repressive nature of the Irish education system, especially in comparison to other EU countries. But this is largely because of just the church influence. We don't even have like comprehensive, inclusive sex education in our schools as well. And I think those lessons that we put forward through our live stream were really staying in the minds of young people. And similar calls should definitely be made in the UK to actually expose the discriminatory nature of education systems under capitalism in the first place.
Brilliant. I think those are really, really good demands. And I think it's also really important that connection that you made to generally the education system. And I think the way that exams have been working way before the pandemic has entered our lives, and just kind of emphasize those issues that exist in the first place, like you said. And I also think that it shows the power of movements like the Leaving Cert movement and the potential that the A-level strikes can have here. And speaking of the A-level strikes again, I was wondering what kind of demands are being put forward by the A-level strike now. So Aisha, can you tell us a little bit about what your aims are and what you think we should achieve with these strikes?
Okay, so we mainly want three things. One, we want a review to the consultation, which is going ahead. As far as I'm concerned, they said that they're going to be doing something about it last week. And the other two aims are: one, we want reduced content to the exams next year, and three, we want guidance on a second wave. Are we going to get our predicted grades? And if so, how are we going to get them, and how are they going to be fair?
Brilliant. I think that's really, really important. And I was wondering, I think it's clear that the Tories don't really have the interests of students in mind. And I want to ask James, I also don't think they have the interests of teachers in mind. So what are your thoughts about this? Do you think that the Tories have handled education well, especially in the context of the pandemic? What do you think about the strikes? Do you think that they can actually help change things?
Well, I think it was Harita who made the point that the pandemic hasn't actually caused many of the fundamental problems in education. What it's done is it's exposed them, And I think what we're seeing in the English education system is the exposure of fundamental flaws in the way that capitalism, particularly at this juncture of capitalism, provides education. So I think in terms of, from the perspective of a teacher, somebody from my perspective, I worked for over a decade in London schools, with a whole range of different students. And I would say that I'm best placed to assess where my students are at and what they need to do in terms of their development. But I would say that one of the features of the Tories' approach to education has been to completely, as best they can, to micromanage teachers, to use league tables, and this is why exams are so kind of fundamental to the Tories' approach to education, and this kind of marketization of education, where league tables are, and Ofsted gradings are, kind of hung over the heads of senior leaders in schools. It means that we've got an education system where those professionals who are actually best placed to assess their students are actually given very little autonomy and very little room to be able to perform that role. And so what we had in the end was, and it's actually reflective of the Tories' whole approach to the pandemic, was a chaotic and kind of rudderless response to things, which really kind of actually reflected the complete contempt that the Tories show towards working class students and those working in the state education system. And I think the points that were made at the beginning about how the algorithm favoured smaller cohorts, which meant private schools, is just a reflection of the stratified and hierarchical nature of the English education system. Let's not forget the Tories, under Theresa May, were quite keen to reintroduce, the grammar system much more widely, which would have meant, not just selection at the age of 16, which I think, I'm opposed to, and I think, is starting to become much more of a feature of the campaigns that we're seeing developing. But they wanted to see selection at the age of 11, and that siphoning off of certain sections of the population into particular streams of education, and of course the private school system, which where only 7% of the school population actually access that. But actually, if you look at those in the kind of what might be deemed the kind of top jobs for capitalism, we see actually much higher proportion, much nearer kind of 40%. In those jobs, and that's what the Tories, that's what the Tories are all about. This is capitalism. This is capitalism reflected in education, which is a system based on on class division and the the maintenance of their system. Obviously tonight is very much about secondary and high and further education. And the GCSEs and the A-levels, but the Conservatives themselves have introduced, a level of high-stakes testing at virtually every single stage of young people's education, to the point where the baseline test of 4-year-olds, we have to kind of repeat it. Children at the age of 4 tested in order to provide effectively a market right the way up their schooling. And if you actually, when Nicky Morgan was education secretary, she drew that out. She said, well, we could use testing data all the way through and link it to people's basically their tax returns in their working life. That's complete anathema to those of us in education who want to work in order to develop young people as rounded individuals. We're not interested in turning children into data, turning them into kind of commodities within a market. We actually want to develop young people, And for all of the, the bluff and the bluster of the Tories who have claimed that we are the blob, we are the enemies of promise, we're not interested in high standards in education, actually what we've got and what has really been exposed this summer is such a crude approach to education that really does reduce most working class kids to numbers on a page. So that's the Tories' approach to education. I think one of the other really important things is that under the Tories' watch, we have seen unprecedented cuts to education. That has been coupled with the Tories abandoning their target of the target that came in under New Labour of 50% of young people going to university. And so once you've got that situation of austerity affecting every stage of education, then you need to find a way to lower expectations and to ration out resources. And so that's what we've seen with exams, that there's a recognition that from the Tories that they can't provide, under their system, under capitalism, when capitalism is in one of its deepest crises for a long time, that they're not able to provide a high quality education and opportunities for every single young person in society. So as a result, they need a mechanism to be able to deal with that, and exams provide that particular tool for them.
Yeah, I really agree with that, and I think that it's also, we've talked about this a lot already. The way that the Tories have shown us what the actual approach to do with education is with the A-levels algorithm is just like clarifies that, they're not using this capitalist myth of individualism being so important, because they're taking into account the things that are the least individual, and they're showing kind of the way that this system is, on the one hand, saying that we need to look at each person individually and no one is affected by class, well, even in society, right? But at the same time, the entire system is built to keep a whole chunk of society away and a whole class of people away. And when they can't do that because of the objective situation, they will find ways to do it unless we fight back. And I think that is really, really important. I think if we're talking about kind of government and parliament, we have a very special situation in Ireland, I think, where we have an actual member of parliament, a TD, who is a socialist and who's fought really, really hard in the context of the Leaving Cert campaign. So I wanted to ask Aretha, can you tell us a little bit about the response that your campaign got from TDs generally, but specifically Mick Berry?
Yeah, definitely. Like, mixed seats in the Dáil, the Parliament, was hugely important, a hugely important tool for us to be able to voice the concerns of working class young people. He was the first TD to demand the government to, give young people information and to stop having young people just being left hanging, and to announce plans for cancellation. And although we've seen other TDs harp onto that position a bit later through the campaign, it was our socialist TD who, fundamentally identified the need for cancellation right at the beginning. And of course, the platform, Mick's platform, was absolutely crucial in attracting the 6,000 people who attended our live stream, our rally, demanding, putting forward our demands for the cancellation of the Leaving Cert and mass funding into third level institutions. And of course, resulting in over 1,500 students signing up to join our campaign and get active. And of course, really allowed us to put a lot of pressure on establishment TDs, especially the likes of the Taoiseach or the Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, and the Taoiseach, me and other TDs that were planning on going into coalition, leaders of other establishment parties, through Twitter. And similar to the situation last week, we were also able to get, our hashtag Cancel Leaving Cert 2020 trending as well. And this really showed how we as socialists can really utilize our positions in Parliament effectively, and really expose the nature of the system that James really excellently outlined, a system that prioritizes, or a system whose education system is fundamentally used to just churn out obedient and quiet workers, not students that can critically think effectively or teach young people the skills needed to, allow them to nurture successfully in life and allow them to pursue their own interests.
Brilliant. I couldn't agree more. And I think that having, members of parliament, obviously it's not the only way that we can change things, and we can't change things just with having members of parliament. But I think that in a scenario like the Leaving Cert or even the A-levels, having this representation can really push people forward and kind of push the fight forward, which is something that is really useful, and I think could be seen in Ireland with Mick Berry's with the things that Mick Berry has done. Now, I think that's also a great opportunity to remind everyone that's watching that issue 9 of the Socialist Alternative paper is out now. So you can hear all about our activity around the world and in England, Wales, and Scotland. And you can get it for a very, very small donation of £1 or £2 that will cover our costs. It's a really special paper. It's you won't find anything like that anywhere else. It's got the socialist analysis that you need, and you won't find anywhere else, definitely not in the mainstream media. But it also has reports from people who are active in campaigns, and all of these campaigns that we're talking about now, but also generally in the workplace. So make sure that you check out the link. Someone will post it in the comments and get your copy of the paper. Now, I want to ask you, Aisha, I think we've heard a little bit about the Irish Parliament, and we've talked a little bit about the Tories, but we technically in this country have a party that should be representing working class interests. And I was wondering, what do you think MPs should do to support your campaign? And especially, what do you think about Starmer's approach so far?
Well, a lot of the Labour MPs haven't done anything. I think the only 2 MPs I've seen are Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, who've actually said something, and they also shared the NEU petition. But Keir Starmer in particular, he just sort of followed what Kate Green said about delaying exams, which will probably cause more problems than solve. So there's that. He just seems to be like blindly following what Kate Green says, who's obviously not got much experience so far because she's only been recently appointed. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think I really agree with that. I think that the MPs haven't done, in some cases, not enough, but in most cases, anything at all to support this campaign. And they really should. It's an issue that should be, a top priority for them, because there's so many young people in this country that are suffering from the approach that the government has taken. And it's kind of like they're taking this back seat for no reason. I want to also ask you about, so you had the strike on the 7th of September, and I want to ask, what are the next steps? So what do you think? Do you think that we need any further action? What do you think we can achieve through this campaign?
Well, we're hoping to obviously advertise a bit more, and then we're going to see what the government says next, because they did say they're reviewing the consultation. So we're sort of waiting to see what they're going to say next. In the meantime, we're sort of focusing on advertising and branching out to other parts of the UK. And hopefully then we can strike together. Instead of doing it like a week together, we could do it like on a day. And that way people's education isn't that impacted by one day. And in that way, teachers are more likely to support it as well.
Brilliant. And I want to ask you something that I think both Aretha and James touched upon a little bit, but I want to ask you, because the name of this panel discussion is Our Education at Stake, Down with Capitalism, Exam Factories. And I was like, what we mean by that is that education has to be radically transformed, and it's not just one thing that needs to change, So I was wondering what your thoughts on that were, Aisha, like what kind of education do we need, and how is it different to what we have now?
Well, I mean, obviously, getting any radical change out of this government isn't possible. And at the moment with the Labour Party, I don't think so either. But I think definitely we could probably learn from this pandemic and see that things like scrapping of AS levels was a really bad idea. We should probably reintroduce things like coursework and things. I think there should be more sort of like apprenticeship options for people that aren't really going into STEM and other subjects. There's obviously this massive focus on taking a subject that will hold value in the future.
I think these are really good points. I do agree that under a Tory government, we are probably not going to be able to change radically. I think also that change and wouldn't be able to come when we have so much focus on profit rather than on, like I think James said before, on the actual producing humans rather than, you know, workers. And if talking about that, I want to ask James, what do you think about it as a teacher? What do you think ideal education looks like, and how do we achieve it? Like, what has socialism got to do with it, basically?
Yeah, so I think that socialists have always, we go right back to the work of Karl Marx, socialists have always engaged in this question of, of the importance of education and the development of not just young people, but of human beings throughout their life. And Marx looked at the work of Robert Owen, who was an industrialist in the 18th century, who started to develop what at the time very radical ideas about the education of working class people. And even Robert Owen, and Marx kind of looks at this question. Even Robert Owen saw the importance of the development of play, of young children, and actually many of the kind of more academic and abstract elements of education shouldn't be introduced until children were 7, and yet almost kind of 300 years later, we're in a situation where the Conservatives are trying to push us back even pre kind of Robert Owen days, but the Bolsheviks in Russia, Lenin and Krupskaya, who was his partner, they devoted a lot of time and energy to look at the kind of role that education could play under a socialist society, and developed many ideas around polytechnical education, which was the idea that the role of a school was not necessarily to be the only provider or any space where education took place, but was more of an organizer of education, and that education should be applied, and it should be meaningful, and it should be linked to the world that we live in. So Lenin talked about if we were to learn about electricity and understand how electricity works, we don't just sit in a classroom away from where electricity is actually used in real life. We should be going to power stations or other factories and looking at how it's applied in real time. And there have been many other kind of radical approaches to education that have tried to actually apply education in a way that the capitalism really is unable to. I think the question, what has socialism got to do with it, is extremely important, because under capitalism, with finite resources and with a class society, then we see that reflected in our education system. So we have to fight, of course, to reform our education system, but part of that fight is about actually transforming society. It's about getting the resources that exist in society. The $11 billion that Jeff Bezos made in one day during the pandemic. Imagine what that could do, in terms of being provided for schools and for teachers and young people and education workers to actually apply that. The huge sums of money that are spent on military infrastructure every year that could be used to create exciting and interesting experiences for young people. What we have now, really, for all of the kind of the kind of supposedly modern veneer that is thrown over our education system, is an education system that hasn't really fundamentally developed beyond the kind of Victorian era education system. And that is a complete indictment of capitalism. That capitalism is unable to provide an education system for the future and for the young people who are in our schools. So I think socialism has absolutely everything to do with it. And I think under socialism, we wouldn't see high stakes examinations in the way that we do. Why, if you think in life, when we look at great achievements in life, they're not all done through a kind of high stakes test that you do within 2 or 3 hours. They're the kind of the product of cumulative effort, and that should be the case with education as well. Why can't a young person go through their school life developing a portfolio of all of their work and their ideas and their understanding, and that be the basis of what they take forward? Why reduce everything to a numerical grade that is relatively meaningless? Also, the goalposts change every year. We've talked about this summer, and the chaos and the inequality that existed with the algorithm. But these things happen every single year. The goalposts have changed every year in terms of grade boundaries. The introduction of the new grading system, the grade 9, which can only be achieved by a certain percentage of the population. Aisha talked about Gove getting rid of AS exams, so that everything in your A levels is all down to those exams right at the beginning, right at the end of their A-level studies, and it is not a measure of what young people are capable of at all. And we heard in the kind of debates around the algorithm that teacher assessment it inflates grades and it ends up being inaccurate. But actually, I would say that high stakes testing actually devalues young people. I've taught many young people who are very capable. They've got many ideas. They're able to articulate them. They're able to write extremely well. But when it comes to an exam, that stress, that anxiety, leads them to not be able to perform in the way that they would in a classroom setting. So actually, that's not a reflection of what they're able to do. That does devalue them, and it has an enormous impact on their mental health, their sense of self-worth, and potentially their future as well. So capitalism is a system that is increasingly exposing itself as a bankrupt system, and that is reflected in education. So the kind of tinkering and a few reforms here and there are not going to be what is going to change the situation. I think we need to be really clear that next summer's exams can't go ahead under the current circumstances and actually be a fair representation of young people. They need to be cancelled, but we need to have a complete transformation of the way that we do education. We need to abolish GCSEs and A-levels and all of the high stakes tests that occur in schools right the way up through primary school, SATs, the end of unit tests. I mean, many schools, people talked about lost learning time during the pandemic. There are many primary schools that you go to where at least 1 in 6 of the weeks within a school term is taken up by assessment. That's an incredible situation that we've ended up in. That actually, young people, are spending so much time cramming for tests that are relatively meaningless. And actually, that's time that could be spent on developing them, on providing interesting and varied opportunities of trips, of projects and explorations that would actually raise the sights of young people. And far too many young people, and there was a really interesting statistic of a study that was done in the southwest of England after the pandemic that showed year 9 students, so 13, 14-year-olds, their anxiety levels actually dropped during the pandemic. We've heard a lot about mental health being a real problem for many people during lockdown, but actually for many teenagers, their anxiety levels dropped because the regime in so many schools is so alienating, is so brutal, it's so inhumane that actually young people, didn't want to be there. So we need to transform that. That means we need to fight on this immediate question. We need to fight for more resources and funding, but it also means we need to kick the Tories out and fight for a socialist alternative.
Thank you, James. I think I really agree with everything that you said, and I think those are really good points, not just about how we can change it, but also what the impact of the current system, what impact it has on not just the actual future of working class kids and kids generally, to be fair, also in the mental health of young people. And I think you know, as someone with very bad exam anxiety, I really relate to what students have been saying for a really long time now, but especially in the context of the pandemic. And I think the stat that you just brought is really interesting in that context, especially because, you know, mental health is going down rapidly during the pandemic. So if exams have such an impact, and we also know that they don't do what they're meant to do. They don't actually check if students understood the material. They don't actually check if students will be doing well at university. And what is the point of them? And I think I'm really interested to hear what Aretha has to say about it, as someone who, you know, has until very recently been a student. Like, what do you think the kind of mental health impact of those exams and the education system, the way that it's organized? What do you think the impact on mental health of students is?
I definitely would agree that, like, even as a student myself, you can definitely see the huge detrimental effect that the way our education system is currently structured has on students' self-worth, as James outlined. Even students that think that they're unable to do certain subjects like maths, or unable think that they cannot write an essay, or think that, you know, that they're just that their brain is just not functioned to study. Just, it does not show that young people are, you know, that young people are unintelligent, or are not worth to be like pursuing education. But it really just shows how flawed our education system is internationally, and how it is really unable to actually teach young people the skills necessary for them, you know, to nurture young people into you know, ethical and good individuals, and rather just, you know, an aim, and it's just exams are just a clear example of how capitalism just attempts to like tick the box of you know, doing education in the most boring and like inefficient manner possible. And in Ireland, a study in a few years ago showed that 12% of 15 to 25-year-olds were experiencing chronic depression, which is the highest level in the EU. And many studies have really shown a correlation between that and the repressive nature of the education system in Ireland. And in 2019 as well, a study done by an exam you know, group, StudyFlix, found that amongst the survey, found that 70% of young people had experienced extreme stress, anxiety, as a result of having to study for such difficult and terminal examinations. And this really shows how, and all of these points have definitely, and this is something you can even like feel in the classroom as a student yourself, and I'm sure definitely as a teacher, has provoked discussion amongst young people as to actually, like, we need alternative forms of education. We need to actually see reforms in education, because our education system has, you know, especially in Ireland, has like honestly changed very little for the past 100 years, which is absolutely abysmal. And it shows a real space for socialist ideas to be put forward. But as James did say, like, capitalism as a system is unable to provide the education necessary to actually nurture young people, and they need to actually join the fight for a socialist alternative, not only on education but on every other issue that the pandemic has also exposed, and to fight for a better system in order to achieve the gains we really need to see in the education system.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Aretha. I think this is a really, really important and incredibly important point. And I think Sue put a really interesting quote in the comments saying, first they said they needed data about children to find out what they're learning. Then they said they needed data about the children to make sure that they're learning. Then the children only learned what could be turned into data. Then the children became data, which is a quote from Michael Rosen. And I think that really kind of shows, like, obviously if you're going to be treated like that in school, you are going to feel alienated, and if you're going to feel alienated, your mental health is going to be extremely hard by that. And I think it's, you know, it's not just about, you know, the gatekeeping to universities, but exams are actually, you know, money making machines for the system. And I want to know, James, what do you think about that? Do you think that, like, we have exams also because they create profit for people?
So yeah, I'm absolutely. It's you know, we, you know, under capitalism at the moment, where there are maybe you know, kind of shrinking opportunities for the capitalists to make profit, then we see that within the public sector, particularly you know, in the UK, where the you know, the education system has been, you know, maybe behind some of the kind of turbocharged privatization we've seen in other places, that actually examinations enable enormous amounts of money to change hands. And our government in Britain, it looks to the US a lot for ideas, you know, for education, which when you speak to education professionals in America, many of them are just completely incredulous that anyone would look to the US as a model for education. But when you actually look at the American education system, you actually start to see why the Tories might be quite interested in it. So the standardized testing market in the US is worth over $2 billion a year. You know, and that is obviously the you know, the money that is made through the administering of the tests, but also then the textbooks that are created in order for students to be able to revise for those tests. The tutoring market that has become you know, much you know, bigger and bigger feature of education in Britain. I mean, a study that was done a number of years ago in London showed that over 40% of you know, of young people in London had some form of private tuition. So we're not just talking about the super rich, you know, accessing private tuition. We're talking about large swathes of the population of middle class and working class kids, you know, feeling the enormous pressure that they're put under by the high stakes testing, and turning to supplementary means of private tuition, whether that's a kind of an individual tutor, or actually, if you go to many of, you know, the supermarkets in you know, in England, you know, you will see some of these private corporations having their own kind of you know, their own kind of you know, tuition centre within the shopping centre, so you can go and, you know, buy your groceries and drop you know, drop your kids off to get their, you know, their little booster in maths or English or science. And so that, you know, the creation of the market within education also creates opportunities for the private sector to intervene in that and make huge sums of money. We're going to see that again with the national tutoring programme that the Tories are planning to roll out, you know, ostensibly to you know, to catch students up on the learning that they've missed. But a lot of that, a lot of the money that will be made available for that will be transferred directly to the private sector in order for them to make huge sums of money. And of course, we haven't really had the opportunity to talk about the Academies programme, the amount of money that is now, you know, effectively in the hands of private individuals, the levels of corruption and nepotism that exist, you know, within that sector as well. And really, I think, you know, the Tories haven't felt confident enough to be able to, you know, in a really explicit way, turn schools into profit-making enterprises. You know, that is still kind of cloaked in this veneer of, you know, of serving the public good. But really, that, you know, eventually the Tories do view a kind of, you know, fully privatised education system, you know, of the creation of vouchers, of schools being able to operate, you know, purely as businesses. You know, all of that is on the agenda of the capitalist class unless we organise and fight back. And we need to sound that warning so that people understand, you know, the context that we're operating in. The context we're operating in is not about, you know, it's not, as we've said already in this you know, this discussion this evening. It's not about, you know, the young people, you know, that supposedly are at the heart of this. It's all about, you know, those major corporations. It's about big business, and it's about ensuring that there is a market for capitalism to be able to profit from education.
Thank you so much, James. I really, really agree with that. And I think that we had one comment that really connects to that well from Miranda, who said, can we talk about how school also functions as daycare so parents or carers can go to work, catering to the market instead of the needs of children? And I think that is really important, really saying it's not just about the actual, active profit that those exams create. It's also what shapes the education system, and it's the impact on the market itself. That is why the Tories were so keen to get schools to open again, because without schools opening, the economy can't actually reopen. Parents can't go to school if they can't go to work if the kids don't have a place to stay, and schools basically act as that rather than a place to enrich and create rounded individuals. So I think we've talked a lot about the problems with the education system, and I think very rightly so, we also clarified that it's not just an issue with coronavirus. It's not just an issue that was created by, a global pandemic that's caused specific issues with studying for exams. It's the system that's the problem. It's the fact that we have those exams to prepare to in the first place that's a problem. And it's kind of the theory behind the education system as a whole that is the problem and what we need to change. And we had one question from the audience that I think is a really good way to wrap up this conversation, because it talks about what do we do next. And we've got a question from Sean, who's saying, how does the panel think we can fight against this corrupt and dangerous education system and achieve the changes from the ground up? With the trade union movement asleep at the wheel and the absence of a mass workers and left movement, what should educators do? And I want to also ask, what should students do, and how they should organize the strikes? And I think we have the perfect person to answer this question as a member of the NEU. So James, what role has the NEU played with regard to this campaign, and what can be done? And also, what does the movement as a whole need to do to achieve those really important changes to the education system? James, can you hear me?
Sorry, I was on mute for a while. I think that obviously that's a key question. We were very Aisha, who spoke on this call, we were very pleased to welcome her at our Lewisham NEU meeting the other night. And I think opportunities to link up, the campaigns of students with the campaigns of those who work in education is absolutely fundamental. And I would appeal, to anyone who's watching this, who's a member of the NEU, to ensure that we are inviting students to our meetings, we are opening up those discussions, that we are developing in schools and colleges committees that involve workers and young people to talk about how we take this forward. The NEU is establishing a commission to look at the question of assessment at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5. We need to engage in that. But of course, the way that we are going to make change as workers is through using our industrial weight and our power. And, Yara talked about, the role of schools as kind of daycare. I mean, the Guardian carried an article right at the beginning of the pandemic that suggested that the closure or opening of schools could have a 3% contribution to GDP either way. It's potentially a very powerful section of the working class who work in schools, but it's a question of how we use that. And actually the immediate question for most school workers at the moment, actually a lot of young people, including A-level students, is the question of school safety. So we can't separate these questions out. The Tories have pushed the schools to be reopened without funding and resourcing the kind of measures that are necessary to keep schools safe. In the same way that they care very little about young people's opportunities and their exam results and so on, they seem to care very little about health and safety as well. And so many of the kind of battles that I think will develop in the next year there will be this ongoing battle around assessment and the question of gradings. We've got a very critical period now when the government and Ofqual and others are making decisions about what will happen with the exams next year. So far, what we've seen from Ofqual and a lot of the exam, the exam bodies is very little change, and actually quite concerning for how that's going to develop in the year. So, any kind of campaigning and pressure that can be put on in the next few weeks to try and have an effect on what decisions will be made for next summer is extremely important. But the question of school safety is already coming to the fore. We're seeing outbreaks in many schools. We're seeing such an intense workload for those working in schools at the moment. We're at the end of our first full week back at school, and people are already, kind of shattered and on their knees. So how are we going to be able to deliver, high quality education and support young people as they enter, kind of critical stages of their education if we are, if we're only treading water? So we need to be fighting on the questions of school safety. We need to be fighting for more funding and resources. We need to be fighting for lower class sizes, not just because of the virus. We've got the highest class sizes in England, the smallest, classrooms as well. We need to be fighting on those questions, not just because of school safety, but because actually smaller class sizes are important for children to be able to be given, the best possible opportunity for their education. So, we desperately need a fight back. We need to fight for, a serious leadership who are willing to take on the government, who are willing to mobilise the immense power that potentially exists there within the education workforce. But of course, all of the points that have been made tonight, unless we actually, frame that around the need for fighting for an alternative to capitalism, an alternative to the complete, waste of potential that exists under capitalism, then really we are only kind of, fighting for concessions. We don't want just concessions. We don't want, just a few tweaks around the exam system, here and there. What we want is society to change so that it actually serves the interests of the mass of the population and not just a few Etonians.
I think that's an amazing point to finish on. I think the capitalist system really needs our education system to maintain those class divisions. And I think that organizing in workplaces and in socialist organizations is extremely important to our fight. And I think also the solidarity between students and teachers is really important. And the NEU can really push that forward and should be pushing that forward as well, because we can't win without the support of organized labor. We can't do that on our own. We have to have that back, that will support us, and we have to all organize. And that's, I think, a great way to kind of ask everyone who's listening today to join us, to join Socialist Alternative. So go to our website, socialistalternative.net, or click the link in the comments now and fill out our join form so we can all fight back against the system in an organized way and can actually win the changes that we desperately need. And also don't forget to follow A-Levels 21 Strike on Instagram. I think the link was also put in the comments a little bit earlier on. So make sure that you follow them so you can see when the next protests are going to be, when the next strikes are going to be, and you can keep in touch and make sure to be present in those struggles as well. And with that, we'll bring this rally to a close. I want to thank all of our speakers today, and of course to our viewers for being as wonderful as always. And please like our page to be notified the next time we go live, which will be next month with another rally. In the meantime, if a month is too long for you, and I'm sure it is, because I mean, how can you wait? You can always listen to the new episode of our podcast that came out last week. This last episode is on China and the tumultuous situation there. We're interviewing socialist activists from there, so it's really, really, really interesting, really worth a listen. In the meantime, just search for Revolutionary Ideas on Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, anywhere you want. And there's also going to be a link in the comments. And that's it from us. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye-bye.